Good evening. Thank you for watching our program. We're starting with our current affairs briefing in English and an interview with Dr. Adrian Delia. We're going to speak about the PAC committee this week, where Dr. Joseph Muscat, former Prime Minister, was questioned once again. And Dr. Delia is going to share with us his recollections of that historic day when former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat resigned from his position. Thank you very much, Dr. Delia, for joining our program today.
You're welcome.
I'd like to focus on the PAC and Joseph Muscat's appearance in the two sessions. Can you give me an update of your thoughts so far?
Well, first of all, PAC is the forum in Parliament. It's a public accounts committee where parliamentarians themselves are bringing up witnesses to ensure that the questioning they actually are conducting is conducive of finding information to see how our monies are spent, how the budget is spent, and whether everything is accountable and in a transparent and good governance manner, basically. That's the gist of a PAC. Now, when you see what happens during PAC sittings, you have witnesses, which we've seen in the past, including Conrad Mintz, for example, who come up with their lawyers and put up a line of defenses, basically saying that they would not like to answer because they're going to incriminate themselves and all kind of excuses, when a politician should be there basically to give an account of what he's been doing because he's answerable to the people. There are witnesses which are not politicians, and we've also seen during PAC sittings other witnesses which were involved in various transactions, businesses, tenders, projects, which are brought there to give information, so that eventually when the report is drawn up, when the people are following, all the facts are there on the table. But when a politician is giving evidence, then there is more onus on the politician to give an account of himself, because in the first place he was there by the people, for the people, and is accountable to the people. This week, unfortunately, we had the second edition of the Joseph Muscat sort of, let's call it a grilling of sorts. And the first time round, if the people who are following remember, he started off by, and it is part of the allowable procedure in a PAC sitting, to give an introduction. Political maneuvering in order to give 30-40 minutes of his version of the story, which is not really what the PAC is there for, because the PAC is there for the witnesses, particularly the politicians, to answer the questions.
So did you believe it got a bit out of hand that time?
I think it gets diluted and prolonged, and obviously people who are there sitting in the hot seat have different tactics on how to either divert or prolong or dilute or literally throw others of God and put people in the context that they want them to. Bottom line, we are in this particular PAC discussing the electrogas project. Now, we all know that there is already a report of the Auditor General, and the Auditor General was very clear in his conclusions. Things were not done right, the process was not done right, and at the end of all this, although the project was completed, was done, the people were left shortchanged. Who is to blame? When direct questions were asked, and there was one direct question, did Conrad Mintz do things right? The answer was, things could have been done better.
There were several clashes between former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat and PAC Chairman Adrian Karbot at Parliament's Public Accounts Committee. Karbot questioned Joseph Muscat about his former Chief of Staff, Keith Kembry, during his second appearance at the PAC when the electrogas power station project was discussed. Muscat accused Darren Karbot of exceeding his remit on the nature of his questions. His reaction marked a contrast to Muscat's more cordial approach during his first appearance before the PAC. The PAC has been conducting a prolonged investigation into the electrogas contract, which has been tainted by allegations of corruption. Electrogas was a flagship project of Muscat's government. From the outset, it was evident that the PAC session with Muscat would be more turbulent than the previous weeks. A significant portion of the hearing focused on the evaluation committee responsible for awarding the multi-million project to the Electrogas Consortium. Muscat claimed he had no influence over the tender document or committee composition, but defended Konrad Mietzi's ministry. He argued that such recommendations were common practice worldwide for government ministers. During the session, it emerged that Brian Tonna of Nexia BT, a firm involved in setting offshore structures for Mietzi and Kembry, served on the committee at the ministry's request. Tonna's company also acted as auditors for one of the Electrogas shareholders. Muscat also acknowledged his prior connection to Tonna, as Nexia BT also handled Muscat's tax returns. However, Muscat maintained that Tonna's role on the committee was part of a larger team of 30 members, and this did not grant him the power to influence the final decision. Muscat attempted to redirect the focus to allegations surrounding his wife's alleged ownership of a secret offshore company, eGrant. However, the panel did not engage with his diversion and tensions escalated further as Karbot pressed Muscat on Keith Kembry's testimony about Konrad Mietzi. The date for Muscat's next appearance before the PAC remains uncertain, with proceedings scheduled to continue in a week's time. Muscat, however, frustrated, gathered his papers and expressed a doubt about his availability for the next session.
Now the important thing is when we're doing the analysis, and I'm going to quote Joseph Muscat here, he said, because in politics eventually it's always the people who have the final judgment. And that is what I invite people to do. We listen to the first PAC rendering, then we listen to the second one, and then substance try to understand where they were really asking the difficult questions, whether there was connections before this was actually put into play, how the tender was issued, how he knew nothing about anything at all parts of the proceedings. And there, people have to decide whom to believe or otherwise.
May I ask you, you were a leader of the opposition, as a leader of a party. Is that probable that you don't know what's going on around you?
Let me tell you, when you have a key minister and basically most of this particular project, like other big projects, we had occasion to even in your programs discuss the Vitals contract. Absolutely. Again, there was the same figure, yes, which was very prominent, Konrad Mietzi. Keith Kembry, the same people always in the loop. Now, I just invite people to understand one thing. When you're leading something, you have key people who are taking care of, in this case, projects. I'm not expecting the Prime Minister of the time to know the details as in consumption, units, pricing, in minute, yeah? Which he was answering about. There he was very happy, giving us all the numbers, the details, the names, the bank consortia, everything. So in the detail, he was very well prepared. But when the general questions, specific though, insofar as when did you know it, he knew nothing. Because, he said, he was leaving all this to either the minister or the people doing the tendering procedures. Now, it is true that the politician cannot enter into the tendering procedure. If that is done, that is the wrong thing in itself. But if there were talks, if there were discussions, if there was progress, if there was like there was in the Vitals case, for example, an MOU, then he would certainly know. Nobody will make me believe that something done by a top minister who was the most trusted of his ministers, the key or star candidate, if Conrad Mizzi knew something, if Keith Schembri knew something, then Joseph Muscat knew that thing.
And I'd like to point out, it was not an isolated incident. I mean, it happened, the same pattern happened over a period of time.
Totally over a period of time and over a period of projects. Every single project or contract or tender where either Keith Schembri or Conrad Mizzi was involved, they literally plagued the procedures. Let me give you a parallel with the Vitals case, which is still very topical because we're now waiting for the appeal. So throughout these proceedings, we had fraudulency which happened before the contract was even published, before tendering, pre-tendering stage, during the giving of the contract, and in the third instance, during the execution of the tender, the works per se. In every single stage, it was plagued by fraud. This is something that not I'm saying, but the judge, in my case, declared in his final judgment. Now there is the appeal, and if all things remain equal, I am very confident that the appeal will confirm the judgment, even because I saw the replies, one, the appeal of the steward people, and the replies of government. Let me remind this, government did not appeal the Vitals judgment, so government is in agreement that there was fraudulency in 3 instances, that government is responsible, AG is responsible, who did not appeal, that the Lands Department is responsible, that the Prime Minister is responsible. The Prime Minister did not appeal that judgment. Now, when that contract happened, it was Joseph Muscat, the Prime Minister. When the judgment was given, and during part of the execution, Robert Abela was Prime Minister. So basically we have a fraudulent contract born under Joseph Muscat. Part of the execution under Robert Abela, judgment given under Robert Abela, who did not appeal. So basically, given that the government, Robert Abela, did not appeal and is accepting that judgment, it means that they are accepting that they are at fault.
Wow.
Now take that into parallel with what happened with Alex.
Absolutely. If I can ask you about Vitals, now that we're talking about it, what conclusion do you foresee?
So, I will rest at peace with myself during whichever years I spend in politics and thereafter, that after and through the efforts of the case, stewards are out. They will not go through the 30-year term, let alone extended by another 60 years. So that's 90 years. That has been literally stopped by the court, and they're out. Even if they win their appeal, they will not go back in again, because the way they did their appeal is in a manner that now they are only discussing the monetary compensation, if at all. But they are out. So at least in my conscience, I know that I stopped the bleeding of funds from our country, from our taxpayer, which up to date was 400 million plus, but would have been 4,000 million plus.
With regards to Vitals, Stuart, what about repatriation of any monies?
Okay, so 400 million were forked out through the people's pockets to government, tax collector, then via the Bank of Valletta, to the steward companies. Before it was Vitals, then it became Steward, the same company. From there, other people got paid. We know that no contractor was paid to build the God's Own Hospital because it wasn't built. We know that the refurbishing of St. Luke's was not paid because it was not done. We know that the refurbishment of Karen Gregg was not paid because it was not done. So who got paid? Where did Steward put those monies? We know that there were disputes between the shareholders, whether it was Vitals at the beginning, then the stewards, people who actually changed shareholding because it remained the same company, but there was a shareholding transfer, We know that Ram Tomanuri got 5 million. We know that top officials got paid loads of money. We know that millions were spent in hotels, luxury cars, flights, entertainment, dinners, lunches. We know that. We know that Joseph Muscat was paid. So we know that out of 400 million, which does not include the wages, because for years they were trying to give the impression in Parliament, whenever I asked the questions or whether I was doing some kind of debate or argument, that so you don't want the doctors to be paid, you don't want the nurses to be paid. Indeed, the report of the auditor found out that 188,500,000 was actually paid over and above that amount which Stewart received to the professionals. That is not in contestation. The 400 million which went elsewhere. And what we said after the judgment, what we said after government did not appeal, so he's agreeing with the judgment, is do an action now, proceed in court to get our money back. I did my part. I stopped the contract. I got Stewart out. I don't have the power or the legal standing to actually now file to get the money back, because that's a different kind of case. We're talking not only politics here, but law.
It's a very long drawn process.
Government can do it.
Yes.
But as soon as he does, if the Commissioner of Police starts investigating, and we actually wrote to him, we made what is called a denuncia. Because if he knows there is fraud, if he knows that the judge found that there is fraud in 3 instances, we actually mentioned more than 30 people who were involved. What do you have to do? Follow the money. It's a money trail. There's not 40,000 or 400,000, which can be sort of split up nicely in cash and vanishes. We're talking about 400 million. So if the police investigate and simply issue warrants to go and see where the money went from the bank to the company, to, for example, Lacotor in Switzerland, which actually was VGH, to anywhere else, to anybody else who got paid, we can find the culprits who stole our money and get it back.
Why do you think it's not being done?
Because they want to protect people, because they don't want to get the money back, because they know that the hard-earned taxes of people went to pay off those who were involved in this fraud. And there are very important people who are in display. There are loads of money which are on the table. Why? Otherwise, wouldn't the government try to get back his money, 400 million of it, so that he then has more to spend, more to give, more checks to send home, more? The elections are coming up in a year of the councils and MEPs, to actually be able to satisfy demands, needs, investments of our country. Why wouldn't he do it?
Wouldn't you say that it might be fraudulent in itself not to proceed with the investigation?
Very interesting question. So there is something which is incorrect, not on. If you do it, then there is something which is incorrect, not good governance. If you don't, whether it is or falls under the extremities of fraud under the criminal code, azione di non fare, that is debatable, but certainly insofar as the terminology used in a layperson's term, of course it is. When you have 85 to 95,000 people on the verge of poverty, you know you have money at these businesses, at these foreign companies, at these politicians, which you choose not to bring back and choose not to give to people who are in need, choose not to give to pensioners, to students. 75% of our youth want to go abroad because they are not interested really in our country anymore. Try to give them incentives to keep them here. Our professionals. We went out on balconies and windows during COVID to applaud them and thank them. But when they came then to get better conditions, the government fell short, and they were basically saying, listen, you're really taking the pay out of here. You know, I mean, why don't you pay? Why don't you invest? Why don't you get back to give to those most in need? It is not only illegal in my mind, it is immoral.
I'd like to go back, if I may, to that day, that historic day when Joseph Muscat resigned from his position as Prime Minister. You were You were the leader of the opposition then. Joseph Muscat was Prime Minister of Malta from 2013 to December 2019. He resigned just after his Chief of Staff, Keith Schembri, resigned after Jorgen Fenech, the owner of the company 17 Black, was arrested on suspicion of being the mastermind in the Daphne Caruana Galizia assassination. Schembri was the owner of several secret companies in Panama, which were connected to the offshore company 17 Black. Joseph Muscat's resignation followed a number of big protests in Valletta, shortly after Jorgen Fenech was arrested and accused in court of masterminding Caruana Galizia's murder. But Schembri also faced a police investigation into money laundering and kickbacks, prompted by a magisterial inquiry, which concluded that he also received money from his accountant Brian Tonna from the sale of citizenship to a Russian family. Former Prime Minister Joseph Muscat had retained Keith Schembri as Chief of Staff, despite his name cropping up in the Panama Papers in 2016. Schembri was retained as Chief of Staff again after the 2017 election.
So many things were happening so fast, both internally in the party, NGOs, people, protests in the streets, going to Parliament, and literally every day not knowing exactly what's going to happen. And the pressure was rising. I need to say this. One of the responsibilities and duties when you're a leader of a party, leader of the opposition, particularly in a two-party state or two-party system, and given this Mediterranean hodgepodge that we have with a little bit of tribalism still very much alive, you have to be very careful, because every word you say is magnified, it becomes louder and louder as it spreads, and it can cause consequence, because you're playing with not only now sentiments, politics, and destiny of a country, but also destiny of people's lives. If trouble brews up to an extent that there's violence on the roads. That was one thing I really was careful to avoid, but to up the ante, to debate, to discuss, to push, to pile the pressure for him and the government to go, but not to go on the verge of violence on the roads. There was an instance when there was a protest going to be called, when then it seemed that from government side they were going to call, I think it was at 5 o'clock, a protest themselves. The party was trying to decide, and basically I had all the top people of the party deciding whether we're going to also call a protest. So the NGOs, the government, the Labour Party rather, the government, the Nationalist Party, all colliding to have demonstrations or protests or manifestations in the road at the same time, with that heat going up, you know. And it was easy to just say, yes, let's do it, let's go, let's this. But I chose to find a backdoor solution to calm things down in order not to have literally all of Malta on the roads at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And the minute you heard that the former Prime Minister resigned,
okay,
how did things unfold?
Rather than the chronological part of it, I would like to tell you how I lived it, really. And obviously, after all that pressure, after all that corruption, after all our debates and fights and protests, to have actually this most powerful of leaders, Joseph Muscat, who actually his demise is announced, bil-Malti is soddisfazzjon, imma in English is not the same. It's the vindication of actually seeing that when the people get together, when the party is pushing, when you have NGOs who are involved, when you have protests on the streets in a civilized country, at a certain point in time, you get a result. There was a change of leadership in Labour, really. It wasn't that the government fell through, fortunately or unfortunately, but fact, the Labour Party managed to have the transition of the party leader in a manner to safeguard the government. So basically, Joe Muscat accepted to go himself in order that his government, his party remains in power. But in my mind, that's a part which leads to more things now. I think now we're a few months past the Vitals decision, which had really reignited that feeling of vindication, that feeling of justice that we have achieved through striving, through efforts. Before protests, this time there was a case. Now summer is coming, so now things are calming down a little bit. But the Labour Party is much weaker now. Robert Abela is not as much in control as Joseph Muscat was. Joseph Muscat is still around. Joseph Muscat is actually issuing warning signs, telling Robert Abela in subtle manners, sometimes directly, listen, if you don't deliver on your promise to keep protecting me and my people, I will be back. I will actually go to the structures of the party to get strength, because that's what our deal was. And Robert Abela, għandu jdejh marbutin, is in a tight spot, because from one side he has those in the party who want to move on. On the other side he has those in the party who are, and this is a very big chunk, still loyal to Joseph Muscat. But all in all, he has now declining numbers which are saying that people are irritated, people are unhappy. The economic climate has changed, the spending power has changed, the cost of living has increased, inflation is now gnawing at what people are able to spend and live their lives with. So I think things will be changing, and will be changing fast.
Are you surprised that Joseph Muscat still has such a huge following?
No, I'm not. Let me tell you why. Because Labour spent 25 years looking for a saviour. Literally, if you want to take a biblical image. And they found him in Joseph Muscat. So after 25 years of losing, if we remove that 1 year, 8-month period of the government of Alfred Sant, Labour were thirsty, they were desperate to win. This young guy came along and he won big after 5 years, notwithstanding all the corruption that was already publicly announced in the media, social media, public knowledge, all over the place. They still won again. So basically, Joseph Muscat delivered to Labour a string of successes which they were thirsting for 25 years.
Joseph Muscat, at the first PAC meeting, said that he paid the highest political price. Do you think it should stop there?
Let me tell you, even the way he said it and what he said shows what? That we are not seeing a politician who is caring for his country, but is caring for himself. I paid the political price. I. What about the country? It's a bit rich that Joseph Muscat actually said this sort of strong statement. I paid the biggest price. He paid the biggest price. So after all that corruption, after a roadmap which was plagued literally by direct orders, by failed projects, by lack of investment, by him being elected the most corrupt politician in the world, after the Panama Papers, after the killing of Daphne Caruana Galizia, after we have a country literally which has its reputation literally going down the drain after years of being recognized as one of the best countries in Europe to do business with an excellent and sterling reputation. I don't think that's the case. I think it's the country which has paid the price. I think it's the people which had paid the price of that day, and they are still paying for it. Because when we don't have investment and dedication, it's going to be generations to fix. When we have 75% of our youths who have lost faith in the country and want to leave, it's going to be a brain drain that we can't cope with. When we have an importation of hundreds of thousands of people in our country and the population which has literally ballooned, not in a structured manner, but by importing precarious work. When we now have the finance minister saying, listen, in 17 years we're going to actually touch the 800,000 mark. We're losing what Malta was. We have lost our reputation. we have lost our peace of mind, and we have lost what we actually had, which made us Maltese. That is the price that has been paid.
Thank you very much for watching our Current Affairs Update in English, where we spoke with Dr. Adrian Delia today. Should you have any comments or any queries, please send them by WhatsApp to the number that appears on the screen. I'm Leah Hogg for Net TV.